The gunshot wound in Preston Kane's side had been bleeding for 3 days when his horse finally collapsed outside the dusty mining settlement of Georgetown, Colorado, on a blistering afternoon in July of 1878. Felicity Owens saw him fall from her kitchen window, where she had been kneading bread dough with flour-dusted hands, and she dropped everything to rush outside into the heat that shimmered off the dirt road like water. The cowboy lay crumpled in the street, his face pressed against the earth, his dark hair matted with sweat and grime. His horse had given its last breath getting him this far, the poor beast already still beside him. Felicity knelt down, her calico dress gathering dust, and pressed 2 fingers against his throat. His pulse fluttered weak and rapid beneath her touch, and when she rolled him gently onto his back, she saw the fever had turned his sun-bronzed skin an unhealthy shade of gray. "Help me get him inside," she called to old Thomas Garrett, who ran the general store across the way. Thomas hurried over, his weathered face creased with concern, and together they hauled the unconscious stranger up the porch steps and into Felicity's small cabin. They laid him on her bed, the only one she had, and Thomas tipped his hat before leaving her to her work. Felicity had learned nursing from her mother before the cholera took her parents 5 years ago, when Felicity was just 18. Now 23 and running a small laundry and mending business to survive in this rough mountain town, she had tended enough injuries to know this man stood at death's door. She cut away his shirt with her sewing scissors, revealing the infected gunshot wound that had torn through the left side of his abdomen. The flesh around it was swollen and angry red, radiating heat that told her the blood poisoning had already set in deep. She worked through the afternoon and into the evening, first cleaning the wound with whiskey that made him moan even in his unconscious state, then digging out the fragments of cloth and debris that had been festering inside. The bullet had passed clean through, which was the only mercy in this situation. She packed the wound with clean cotton soaked in carbolic acid, a precious supply she kept for emergencies, and bound his torso with strips torn from her spare linens. The fever burned through him like wildfire. Felicity sat beside the bed with a basin of cool water, changing the cloths on his forehead every few minutes as his temperature raged. He thrashed and muttered, calling out names she did not recognize, speaking of cattle drives and broken promises, of a brother who had betrayed him and a ranch he might never see again. His voice, even delirious, carried a deep timbre that seemed to resonate in her chest. Through that first night, Felicity dozed in the chair beside him, jerking awake every time his breathing changed or his movements became too violent. Twice she had to hold him down to keep him from tearing open his wound, her small hands surprisingly strong against his fevered strength. By dawn, her muscles ached and her eyes burned, but she prepared fresh compresses and checked his bandages, relieved to see the bleeding had stopped. The second day brought no improvement. Preston's fever climbed higher, and Felicity feared she would lose him. She forced water between his cracked lips drop by drop, tilting his head carefully so he would not choke. She changed his bandages 3 times as the wound continued to drain, each time cleaning it thoroughly and applying fresh medicine. The smell of infection filled her small cabin, and she opened the windows despite the heat, letting the mountain breeze carry it away. Thomas stopped by with supplies, bread and dried meat he insisted she take without payment, and news that no one in Georgetown knew anything about the stranger. His horse had worn a brand from Texas, the Flying K, which meant he had ridden hundreds of miles in his condition. Thomas also brought word that the sheriff, a lazy man named Dorsey who spent more time drinking than enforcing what little law existed in Georgetown, had been asking questions. A wounded man showing up in town always raised suspicions, and Thomas advised Felicity to be careful. She thanked him for the warning but knew she could not turn the cowboy out, even if she wanted to. Something about him called to her in a way she could not explain. Perhaps it was the vulnerability of his fevered state, or the strong bones of his face that suggested both hardness and honor, or simply the loneliness that had been her companion for too long. Whatever the reason, Felicity found herself talking to him as she worked, telling him about Georgetown and her life here, about the mountains that surrounded them and the changing seasons that painted them in different colors. On the third day, the fever broke. Felicity had been changing his bandages in the early morning light when she noticed his skin felt cooler. She pressed her palm to his forehead and nearly wept with relief. The raging heat had diminished to a normal warmth, and his breathing had evened out into genuine sleep rather than unconscious delirium. The wound, when she examined it, showed the first signs of healthy healing, the angry red fading to pink at the edges. She let him sleep through the day, checking on him between her regular work. Customers came with their laundry and mending, and she conducted her business as usual, though she found her attention constantly drawn to the bedroom where the cowboy rested. She prepared a thin broth from chicken bones and vegetables, keeping it warm on the stove for when he woke. Evening was settling over Georgetown when Preston Kane finally opened his eyes. Felicity had been sitting beside the bed, hemming a dress by lamplight, when she heard him stir. She set aside her sewing and leaned forward as his eyelids fluttered open, revealing eyes the color of storm clouds, gray and deep and searching. He looked at her for a long moment, confusion clouding his features. Then his gaze traveled around the unfamiliar room before returning to her face. His lips moved, but no sound came out at first. Felicity reached for the cup of water she kept ready and carefully lifted his head to help him drink. He managed a few sips before falling back against the pillow, exhausted from even that small effort. "Where am I?" His voice came out as a hoarse rasp, barely above a whisper. "Georgetown, Colorado," Felicity said softly. "You rode in 3 days ago, shot and fevered. Your horse collapsed in the street." Pain flickered across his face, whether from the mention of his horse or his wound she could not tell. "The horse is gone. I am sorry. The animal gave everything to get you here." Preston closed his eyes for a moment, his jaw tightening. When he opened them again, they focused on her with new intensity. "You took me in, tended me. I could not very well leave you in the street." Many would have. He studied her face, taking in the auburn hair she had pinned back loosely, the green eyes that showed both kindness and strength, the delicate features that suggested a gentleness at odds with the rough mining town surrounding them. "I owe you my life." Felicity felt heat rise to her cheeks under his scrutiny. "You owe me nothing yet. You are still recovering, and infection can return. You should not try to talk too much. I need to know your name." "Felicity Owens." "Felicity." He said it slowly, as if tasting each syllable. "Pretty name." "I am Preston Kane." "I know, you spoke it in your fever dreams, among other things." His eyes widened slightly. "What other things?" "Nothing too revealing if that worries you. Mostly names and places." She picked up the bowl of broth. "You need to eat something, just a little to start." Helping him sit up enough to take the broth was an ordeal that left them both trembling, but Preston managed to swallow several spoonfuls before his strength gave out. Felicity eased him back down and pulled the quilt up to his chest. The evening had grown cool, and she worried about him taking a chill now that the fever had broken. "Thank you," he said, his eyes already drooping with exhaustion, "for everything. Rest now. We can talk more when you are stronger." But even as sleep claimed him again, Preston reached out and caught her hand. His grip was weak but deliberate, his calloused palm warm against her smaller hand. "Felicity," he murmured, his words slurring with fatigue, "will you marry me?" She froze, certain she had misheard, but his eyes had opened again and were watching her with unexpected clarity despite his exhaustion. "What did you say? Marry me?" His thumb moved slowly across her knuckles. "I know it sounds crazy, I know you do not know me. But these 3 days, even lost in the fever, I heard your voice, felt your care, knew your goodness. A man can search his whole life and not find what I found in your touch, in your kindness to a stranger who might have been an outlaw for all you knew." Felicity's heart hammered against her ribs. "You are not thinking clearly. The fever just broke. You are weak and confused." "I am weak, yes. Confused, no." His grip on her hand tightened slightly. "I have been drifting for 2 years since I lost my ranch, since my brother cheated me out of my inheritance and forced me to ride away from everything I knew. I have been shot at, betrayed, and left for dead. But lying here, hearing your voice like an angel calling me back from the darkness, I knew something I have never known before. I knew home." Tears pricked at Felicity's eyes. The loneliness she had carried for 5 years seemed to crack open in her chest, and she found herself unable to pull away from his touch, unable to dismiss his words as mere fever talk, even though common sense screamed that she should. "Preston, you barely know me." "Then give me time to know you better. Do not say no, not yet. Just think about it. Let me prove I am a man worth having." His eyes searched hers with desperate hope. "I may not have money or property right now, but I am strong when I am well. I can work, I can provide. And I swear on my life that I would spend every day trying to make you happy, trying to be worthy of the gift you have already given me. The gift of basic human decency. Of not letting you die in the street, the gift of hope," he said quietly. "I had none left until I woke up and saw your face." Felicity sat there holding his hand as his eyes finally closed in sleep, his breathing evening out. She should have dismissed his proposal as the ramblings of a man barely returned from death's edge, but something in his words had struck a chord deep in her soul. She had been alone for so long, running her small business and keeping to herself, watching couples pass by her window and wondering if love would ever find her in this harsh mountain town, where women were scarce and good men even scarcer. She gently extracted her hand from his and stood, walking to the window to look out at Georgetown's Main Street. Lamps were being lit in windows up and down the road, small points of light against the gathering darkness. The mountains rose like sentinels around the town, their peaks still capped with snow even in July. This place had been her refuge and her prison both, a place where she could survive but never quite live. Could she truly consider marrying a man she had known for 3 days, even if she had only spoken to him for a few minutes? It defied all logic and propriety. Yet something in her heart whispered that Preston Kane was different, that fate or providence or simple chance had brought him to her door for a reason. The next morning, Preston was notably stronger. He managed to sit up on his own when Felicity brought him breakfast, though the effort clearly cost him. She had prepared eggs and toast, simple food that would be easy on his recovering system, and he ate with the hunger of a man returning to life. "How long have I imposed on your hospitality?" he asked between bites. 4 days now, counting today, and it is no imposition." "I imagine your husband might disagree." He said it casually, but Felicity caught the question underneath. "I have no husband, I live alone." Something that might have been relief flickered across his face. "Then you run your own household. That takes strength, or stubbornness. Most people in Georgetown cannot tell the difference." She poured him more water from the pitcher. "Tell me about Texas, about your ranch." Preston's expression darkened, but he answered. "The Flying K Ranch, named for my family. My father built it from nothing, 30,000 acres of the best grazing land in the hill country. He raised me and my brother Michael to run it together when he passed. He paused, pain evident in his eyes. But father did not know Michael as well as he thought. 6 months after the funeral, I discovered Michael had been gambling away the ranch profits and had borrowed against the land. When I confronted him, he accused me of stealing from the family accounts. Had you? No. Preston met her eyes directly. I swear to you, I never took a penny that was not rightfully mine, but Michael had falsified records, made it look like I had been embezzling for years. He had friends in the local law, people he had been careful to cultivate. I was given a choice: leave Texas voluntarily or face arrest and trial that Michael had rigged against me. Felicity sat down in the chair beside the bed. So you ran. I left to save my own neck, yes. Took my horse and what few possessions I could carry and rode north. I have been working cattle drives, ranch work, whatever I could find for the past 2 years. Saved every dollar, thinking someday I might have enough to go back and fight for what was mine. He looked down at his bandaged side. Then I made the mistake of witnessing a robbery in Denver. 3 men held up a bank, killed the clerk. I was outside when they came running out, and I looked one of them full in the face. He shot me rather than risk me identifying him later. Did you go to the law? I tried. Made it to the sheriff's office and told them what I had seen before I collapsed. They got a doctor to pull the bullet out, but he did a poor job of it, and I knew infection was setting in. The outlaws had friends too, apparently. Someone took a shot at me through the window of the boarding house where I was recovering. I figured my chances were better on the road, even wounded, so I rode out. Spent 3 days trying to stay ahead of death before my horse brought me here. The story explained so much, the delirious mentions of betrayal and justice, the wariness even now in his eyes. Felicity felt her heart ache for him, this man who had lost everything through no fault of his own and kept fighting anyway. The men who shot you, do you think they followed you? No. I was careful, took a winding route, and honestly, I doubt they cared enough once I left Denver. Dead men tell no tales, but dying men who ride away into the mountains usually finish the job for you. He managed a weak smile. They did not count on you. I am beginning to think you give me too much credit. Any decent person would have done the same. That is where you are wrong, Felicity. I have met many people in my travels, and decency is rarer than gold. He shifted in the bed, wincing slightly. Which brings me back to my question from last night. I know you think I was out of my head with fever, but I meant every word. I am asking you, clear-minded and sober, to consider being my wife. Felicity stood and walked to the window, her hands clasped together. Preston, I appreciate that you feel gratitude toward me, but gratitude is not love, and marriage should be built on more than one person saving another's life. You are right. His voice was steady behind her. So let me court you properly. Let me stay in Georgetown while I heal, get to know you as you deserve to be known. Let me prove that what I feel is not just gratitude but genuine affection and respect. And if, after a reasonable time, you find you could care for me even a fraction as much as I have come to care for you, then consider my proposal seriously. She turned to face him. And if I find I do not care for you that way, then I will accept your decision and move on, grateful for your care and nursing but respectful of your wishes. He held her gaze. But I hope you will give me that chance. Give us that chance. Felicity considered him carefully, this wounded cowboy who had ridden into her life and somehow turned it upside down in a matter of days. Logic told her to send him on his way once he was healed, to return to her quiet, safe existence. But her heart, that traitorous organ, had already begun to betray her with its racing whenever he looked at her with those storm-gray eyes. "Very well," she said finally. "You may stay while you recover and we will see what develops. But I make no promises, Preston Kane. I will not marry a man simply because he asks, no matter how prettily he phrases it." The smile that broke across his face transformed it, chasing away the pain and hardness and revealing the man he must have been before loss and betrayal had marked him. "That is all I ask. A fair chance." Over the following weeks, Preston grew stronger day by day. Felicity tended his wound faithfully, changing bandages and checking for any signs of returning infection, and was rewarded by watching the injury heal cleanly. Within a week, he could walk around the cabin, though he tired easily. Within 2, he was insisting on helping with small tasks despite her protests. She discovered he had a gift for fixing things. The door that had stuck for 2 years opened smoothly after he worked on it for an afternoon. The loose floorboards that had creaked beneath her step were silenced by his careful repairs. He mended her fence, patched holes in her roof, and rebuilt the small chicken coop that had been threatening to collapse. He worked slowly, conserving his strength, but the quality of his craftsmanship showed in every task. They talked for hours, discovering shared thoughts on everything from politics to poetry. Preston had been educated by his mother before her death when he was 12, and he loved books with a passion Felicity understood. She loaned him volumes from her small collection, and they debated the merits of Dickens versus Hawthorne while she cooked or mended and he rested on the porch. He made her laugh, something she had not done enough of in recent years. His stories of cattle drives and trail life were often absurd, filled with cantankerous cows and cowboys who got themselves into ridiculous situations. He did impressions of the various characters he had met, from pompous trail bosses to eccentric ranch cooks, that had her giggling like a girl. But there were serious moments too, times when they shared their griefs and losses. Felicity told him about her parents, about watching helplessly as cholera ravaged them both within days of each other, about the crushing loneliness that had followed. Preston spoke of his mother's death, of his father's slow decline after losing her, of the brother he had loved and trusted who had betrayed him completely. "You hate him?" Felicity asked one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sun set behind the mountains. Preston was quiet for a long moment. "I did at first. The hatred burned in me like acid, eating away at everything else. But somewhere along the road I realized hatred was just another way of being bound to him, another chain keeping me prisoner to what he had done. So I let it go." He looked at her. "I do not hate Michael anymore. I pity him, actually. He sold his soul for money and land, and neither will ever be enough to fill the hole where his conscience used to be." Felicity reached out and took his hand, an increasingly natural gesture between them. "You are a better man than most, Preston Kane." "I am a man who wants to be worthy of you," he said quietly. "That is enough to keep me striving." Georgetown's citizens gradually accepted Preston's presence, though Sheriff Dorsey remained suspicious and made a point of stopping by to question him about his past. Preston answered honestly, holding nothing back, and even Dorsey had to admit there were no outstanding warrants for anyone matching his description. Thomas Garrett became a friend, often joining them for supper and bringing news from town. It was Thomas who brought word, 6 weeks after Preston's arrival, that 3 men had been asking around Denver about a cowboy matching Preston's description. "They sound like the bank robbers you saw," Thomas said grimly. "Word is they are not happy about the witness who got away." Preston's face went pale and he immediately stood. "I need to leave. I will not bring danger to Felicity or this town." "Sit down," Felicity said firmly. You are not fully healed yet, and running will only make you an easier target. We need to think this through." "She is right," Thomas agreed. "Besides, Georgetown is not an easy town to ride into unnoticed. The mountain passes are narrow, and we have got people who watch the roads. We will know if strangers are coming." They made preparations anyway. Preston, who had been wearing clothes borrowed from Thomas, purchased a gun belt and revolver from the general store, spending precious dollars from the small amount of money he had managed to keep hidden in his boot. He practiced drawing and shooting in the canyon behind Felicity's house, and she was surprised by his speed and accuracy. "My father taught me," Preston explained. "He said a man in Texas needed to know how to defend himself and his property. I never wanted to be a gunfighter, but I can handle myself when necessary. I hope it does not become necessary." "So do I, but I will not let anyone hurt you, Felicity, not while I draw breath." The intensity in his voice sent shivers down her spine, and she realized with sudden clarity that she had fallen in love with him. It had happened so gradually she had not noticed the exact moment, but somewhere between his fevered arrival and this instant, her heart had given itself completely to Preston Kane. The thought terrified and exhilarated her in equal measure. That night, unable to sleep, Felicity rose from her bed and walked into the main room of the cabin. Preston had been sleeping on a pallet by the stove ever since he was strong enough to insist she take her bed back, and she found him awake, sitting by the dying fire. Could not sleep either. He asked softly. She shook her head and sat down beside him. "Preston, about your proposal." He went very still. "Yes, you asked me to give you a fair chance, to let you court me properly and prove your feelings were genuine." She took a deep breath. "You have done that and more. You have shown me kindness, respect, humor, and strength. You have shared your heart and your history with me. You have worked to make my life easier even while recovering from a wound that would have killed most men." "Felicity," he breathed, hope dawning in his eyes. "I am saying yes. I will marry you, Preston Kane, if you still want me." For a moment, he simply stared at her as if unable to believe what he had heard. Then he reached out and cupped her face in his hands, his touch achingly gentle. "If I still want you." "Felicity, I have wanted nothing else from the moment I woke and saw your face. You are the answer to prayers I did not know I was praying. You are light and hope and home, all wrapped up in one beautiful, stubborn, incredible woman." He kissed her then, and Felicity felt the world narrow to just the two of them, to the warmth of his lips on hers and the strong circle of his arms around her. It was her first kiss, and she gave herself over to it completely, pouring into it all the loneliness and longing she had carried for so long and all the new love that had bloomed in the past weeks. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Preston rested his forehead against hers. "We will do this properly. I will speak to the preacher tomorrow, arrange for a wedding as soon as possible. I wish I had a ring to give you, something worthy of this moment, but I promise I will get you one as soon as I can afford it. I do not need a ring. I just need you." They sat together by the fire until dawn, talking about their future, making plans and dreaming dreams. Preston spoke of finding work at one of the larger ranches in the area, saving money to perhaps buy a small piece of land of their own someday. Felicity talked about expanding her laundry business, maybe even opening a proper shop in town. They imagined children, a family to fill the cabin with love and laughter. The wedding was arranged for the following Sunday at Georgetown's small church. Felicity wore a simple dress of ivory cotton that she had sewn herself, with lace at the collar and cuffs that had been her mother's. Preston borrowed a suit from Thomas, who served as his best man. The ceremony was small, attended by the dozen or so people in Georgetown who Felicity considered friends, but it was perfect. when Preston slipped the plain gold band onto her finger, a ring he had traded his gun for, and then immediately bought another cheaper one to replace it. Felicity felt tears of joy stream down her face. The preacher pronounced them man and wife, and Preston kissed her with a tenderness that made the small congregation sigh with romantic approval. They celebrated with a simple dinner at the boarding house, and then Preston carried Felicity over the threshold of the cabin that was now truly their home. Their wedding night was gentle and sweet, two people discovering each other with reverence and growing passion, and Felicity fell asleep in her husband's arms feeling more complete than she had ever imagined possible. The danger they had worried about never materialized. Word eventually came through Thomas that the three bank robbers had been caught in a shootout with lawmen near Pueblo, 2 killed and 1 arrested. The threat that had hung over them dissipated like morning mist, and Preston could finally breathe easy. He found work at the Whitman Ranch, 10 miles outside Georgetown, as a foreman. The owner, a shrewd but fair man named Joseph Whitman, recognized Preston's skills with horses and cattle immediately and paid him a good wage. Preston rode out early each morning and returned each evening to Felicity, and their life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Felicity continued her laundry and mending business, and with Preston's income added to hers, they began to save money steadily. They talked often of their dreams of someday having their own ranch, small perhaps but theirs, where they could build something lasting together. A year after their wedding, Felicity discovered she was pregnant. Preston's joy was almost comical in its intensity, and he immediately became impossibly protective, trying to prevent her from doing any work that required the slightest effort. She laughed at his fussing but loved him all the more for it. Their son was born in the spring of 1880, a healthy boy with his father's gray eyes and his mother's auburn hair. They named him Samuel, after Preston's father, and Preston cried when he first held the tiny baby in his arms. "I never thought I would have this," he whispered to Felicity as she recovered in their bed, exhausted but glowing. "A wife I love beyond measure, a son, a home. I thought my brother had taken everything from me, but he only took things. You have given me what matters. You have given me a family." Felicity reached up to wipe the tears from his cheeks. "We have given each other that. We have made this together." Sam was 6 months old when a letter arrived at the Georgetown post office addressed to Preston Kane. Thomas brought it to the cabin with a worried expression. "It has a Texas postmark," he said. Preston opened it with shaking hands, Felicity reading over his shoulder. The letter was from a lawyer in Austin, informing Preston that his brother Michael had died of a sudden illness, and that, as the only surviving heir, Preston was now the legal owner of the Flying K Ranch. However, the estate was mired in debt and legal complications that would require Preston's presence to sort out. Preston read the letter 3 times before setting it down. "I do not know what to do. Part of me wants to ignore it, to let the ranch go and stay here with you and Sam. This is our home now. But another part of me remembers my father, how hard he worked to build that place. It feels wrong to let it all disappear without at least trying to save it." Felicity took his hand. "Then we go to Texas, all of us together. We see what can be salvaged, and we make our decision from there. But we do it as a family." The journey to Texas took 3 weeks with a baby, traveling slowly and stopping often. But they made it to the Flying K Ranch in early autumn, and Preston stood at the gate of his childhood home with tears streaming down his face. The ranch was in terrible shape. Michael had run it into the ground, selling off cattle and equipment to pay gambling debts, mortgaging the land multiple times over. But the lawyer had been competent and honest, and he had managed to consolidate the debts into something manageable. With the money Preston and Felicity had saved, plus the sale of some of the land they did not need, they could satisfy the creditors and keep the core of the ranch. It took 2 years of backbreaking work. Preston rebuilt the herd slowly, starting with a few dozen head of cattle and carefully breeding them. Felicity managed the ranch accounts with meticulous precision, tracking every dollar and finding ways to stretch their resources. They hired a small crew of loyal cowboys, men who appreciated Preston's fair treatment and worked hard in return. Sam grew into a bright, active toddler who loved following his father around the ranch. And when Felicity discovered she was pregnant again, they celebrated the news with cautious joy. Their daughter, Grace, was born in the spring of 1882. A delicate girl with her mother's green eyes and a sunny disposition that charmed everyone she met. The ranch prospered slowly but steadily under Preston's management. He proved to be as good a rancher as his father had been, with a gift for breeding quality cattle and a reputation for honest dealing that brought buyers from across Texas. Felicity's business sense and careful management of their finances turned profit into savings, savings into investments. 5 years after returning to Texas, the Flying K Ranch was debt-free and thriving. They had expanded the herd to over 1,000 head, built a new barn and bunkhouse, and renovated the main house that had fallen into disrepair under Michael's neglect. Preston hired a teacher to come to the ranch 3 days a week to educate Sam and Grace, determined that his children would have every advantage. On their 6th wedding anniversary, Preston took Felicity on a picnic to a hilltop overlooking the ranch. They sat together watching Sam and Grace play in the grass below while a cowboy kept watch over them, and Preston pulled a small box from his pocket. "I have owed you this for 6 years," he said, opening it to reveal a ring with a small but perfect diamond. "It is not much, but it is real and it is forever, like my love for you." Felicity let him slip it onto her finger beside the plain gold band she had never stopped wearing. "It is beautiful, Preston, but you have already given me everything I could ever want." "Have I?" He pulled her close. "Because I keep thinking about that night in Georgetown when I woke up from the fever and saw your face for the first time. I was half out of my mind, burning up and barely alive, but I looked at you and I knew. I knew you were my future, my hope, my salvation. Everyone thought I was crazy to propose to you then, probably including you." "Definitely including me," Felicity laughed. "But I was not wrong, was I? You were all those things and more. You saved my life, yes, but more than that, you gave me a reason to live it. You gave me love and family and purpose." He kissed her softly. "I am the luckiest man alive, Felicity Kane, not because I own this ranch or have money in the bank, but because you said yes to a fevered cowboy who had nothing to offer but his heart." Felicity felt tears of joy slip down her cheeks. "I am the lucky one. You rode into Georgetown dying and somehow found the strength to love me, to build this life with me. We have made something beautiful together, Preston, something that will last." They sat together on that hilltop as the sun set over the Flying K Ranch, watching their children play and their cattle graze, surrounded by the land that had been lost and reclaimed, destroyed and rebuilt. It had taken a bullet and a fever, a desperate ride and a woman brave enough to open her door to a dying stranger, but they had found their way to this moment, this life, this love. 2 more children joined their family in the following years, twin boys named after Felicity's father and Preston's mother. The ranch continued to grow and prosper, becoming one of the most respected in the hill country. Sam eventually took over the day-to-day operations when Preston's hair turned gray, and Grace married a good man from a neighboring ranch, uniting 2 of the largest properties in the region. But even in their later years, when their children had children of their own and the Flying K had become a legacy spanning generations. Preston and Felicity would sometimes sit together on that same hilltop and remember. They remembered Georgetown and that dusty street, the fevered cowboy and the woman who nursed him, the impossible proposal and the courage to say yes. They remembered because those moments had changed everything, had taken two lonely, wounded people and made them whole. Preston had ridden into Felicity's life with a bullet in his side and a broken heart, and she had healed both. In return, he had given her the one thing she had thought lost forever, a partner to share her life, a love that would endure all the trials the world could throw at them. On Preston's 75th birthday, surrounded by children and grandchildren in the house that had become a home full of love and laughter, Felicity watched him hold their newest great-grandchild and felt her heart swell with gratitude. This man who had woken from a fever and asked her to be his wife had kept every promise he made that day and more. He had loved her faithfully, provided for her generously, cherished her completely. "What are you thinking about?" Preston asked, catching her watching him. "About a fevered cowboy who asked me to marry him before he even knew my favorite color." Preston handed the baby to its mother and crossed the room to sit beside Felicity, taking her hand in his, as he had done thousands of times over their 40 years together. "Green," he said. "Like spring grass and new hope in your eyes when you looked at me that first time. I knew that before I even asked. I knew everything that mattered." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "You were crazy. I was inspired." He kissed her forehead. "By an angel who pulled me back from death and gave me a life worth living." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching their family laugh and talk and love each other, the legacy of that single moment when fate and courage and desperate hope had combined to create something miraculous. Preston had been dying when he rode into Georgetown, but Felicity's care had given him life. And in waking and asking her to be his wife, he had given her the same gift, pulling her out of loneliness and giving her a future full of love. It was, they both agreed, the best bargain either of them had ever made. One life saved, one question asked, one brave yes given, and from those simple acts had grown a love story that would be told around the Flying K Ranch for generations to come. The story of the fevered cowboy and the woman who loved him, who built an empire from nothing but hard work and devotion, who proved that sometimes the craziest decisions are the ones that make the most sense. Years later, when Preston passed peacefully in his sleep at the age of 82, Felicity sat beside his bed holding his hand and thanked him for every moment they had shared. She mourned him deeply but not bitterly, because they had been blessed with decades together when they might have had mere days. She had nursed a fevered cowboy back to health, and he had woken asking her to be his wife, and that choice had given them both everything. Felicity lived another 5 years, spending them surrounded by the family they had created, working in the garden Preston had built for her, and sitting on their hilltop watching sunsets paint the Texas sky in gold and crimson. When her time came, she went peacefully, and her children buried her beside Preston on that hilltop under a spreading oak tree, their graves marked with simple stones that bore their names and a single inscription: "Together forever, as promised." The Flying K Ranch continued to thrive under their descendants' care, a testament to what could be built on a foundation of love and commitment. And in Georgetown, Colorado, the small cabin where Felicity had once nursed a dying stranger became a landmark, preserved by the Historical Society as a reminder that miracles can happen anywhere, even in dusty mining towns on hot July afternoons. The story of Preston and Felicity Kane became legend in 2 states, told and retold until the details blurred and expanded into myth. but the heart of it remained true. A cowboy rode into town dying, and a woman saved him. In his fever, he saw clearly enough to ask for her hand, and she was brave enough to eventually say yes. From that unlikely beginning grew a love that weathered every storm, overcame every obstacle, and created a legacy that endured long after both of them had gone. Their great-great-grandchildren still work the Flying K Ranch, still gather on holidays to share stories of the fevered cowboy and his devoted wife, still understand that their entire existence stems from one woman's compassion and one man's ability to recognize love even in the midst of death. It is a story of the Wild West, of Texas and Colorado, of 1878 and all the years that followed. But more than that, it is a story of what happens when two people find each other against all odds and choose to hold on no matter what. Preston Kane rode into Georgetown expecting to die. Instead, he found Felicity Owens, and she became his life, his love, his everything. She nursed him back to health with gentle hands and a generous heart, and when he woke and asked her to be his wife, she gave him the gift of considering his impossible proposal. In time, that consideration became acceptance, that acceptance became love, and that love became a lifetime of partnership and devotion. They built something beautiful together on the ashes of what they had lost, proving that endings can become beginnings, and that sometimes the best things in life come from the most unexpected sources. A bullet brought Preston to Felicity's door, but love kept him there, and together they created a future neither could have imagined in those early desperate days. Their story is a reminder that hope can bloom in the darkest moments, that love can find us when we least expect it, and that sometimes the craziest leap of faith leads to the softest landing. Preston was right to ask, even fevered and dying, because he saw something worth fighting for in Felicity's green eyes. And Felicity was right to say yes, even though it defied all logic, because her heart recognized what her mind could not yet accept. They were two people damaged by loss and loneliness who found healing in each other, two souls who recognized their match, even in the most unlikely circumstances. Their love story spanned decades and created generations, but it began with the simplest of acts. One person caring enough to help a stranger, and that stranger being grateful enough, aware enough, blessed enough to recognize the angel who had saved him and ask her for forever. And she, miracle of miracles, said yes.